Because we don't understand how life formed, it is difficult to estimate this probability. The likelihood of a complex molecule like DNA being created by random collisions of atoms in a primordial ocean is fantastically small. In an infinite universe, it would happen in some places, but they would be very far apart. If we want to find advanced intelligent life, our best bet is to listen for radio signals.
Look up to the stars and the forests that surround. Do you see them? Do you hear them? Are they there? SpacedOutRadio.com presents S4 with Forest Moon Paranormal's Eric Cooper and friends. Also, take the time to join the Forest Moon Paranormal Facebook group.
I knew I should have made a left turn at Albuquerque.
Conspiracy, Area 51, Dogman, Ghosts, Cover-Ups, UFOs. The hidden will reveal itself.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go live on S4 with Eric Cooper.
Alright, good morning, Forest Moon Paranormal and S4 if you're listening from S4. This is our third and you're caught up training, and it's on UFO investigation and alien abduction. And this is one we did this month, so if you've taken the What is FMP slash Paranormal 101, which was our first training, the Paranormal Protection, which was our second training. I just got the audio for that done yesterday. This is your third and you're caught up. Next month we'll be doing occult symbology. Very important in this field. Many don't understand that, but it is important. And so if you're local, also on the 27th of this month we'll have our joint training, joint business meeting, joint team meeting with a few other teams that are out there here locally. And so we're going to talk UFO investigation, and you should have the PowerPoint already up. So on slide 1, what are the dangers of investigating UFOs? Well, one is you'll see in a few cases that we discuss, because we also go into a lot of history of UFOs and abduction. And you're going to see radiation burns. We'll get into a little more on that in depth here later on. But the chance of radiation is high on UFO landing cases. So what you do to alleviate that, I have a radiation alarm. So if radiation is detected, I have an alarm that goes off. What we plan on getting eventually is radiation detection equipment, and that'll help in this case. Also, compasses will go erratic. EMF meters will go off. So some of that stuff we do have, obviously. Chance of abduction, I just kind of threw that in there. There is a chance, but probably not. Usually with abductions, they already have their set people they abduct, and it's usually in a family line type deal. So they can trace DNA changes, DNA manipulation, things of that nature. That depends on the race. We'll get into that. Others chasing the same thing. Well, so if you have a whole community that sees a UFO that's, cruising along, chance of a bunch of people jumping in a 4x4 with a bunch of guns chasing the same thing is a probability, and beware of them. And then finally, the government doesn't like competition, so watch out for the government. So moving along. Equipment and resources, like I said, compass, radiation alarms, detection equipment, EMF meter. Now, number 4, the website, flightaware.com, actually shows you, if you let it lock on to your current location, will show you what airlines are over the skies. Because one thing about UFO investigation, you have to rule out a whole lot of things. It could be an airplane. It could be an experimental military craft. It could be, in some cases, actually been the reflection of the moon on geese that were flying. As funny as that sounds, it does happen. So, and planets and atmospheric anomalies also. But you have to look at the pattern. If it zigzags, if it doesn't make any noise, it also depends on the location, how far away from you it was, if there was a landing, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different scenarios that go into investigation. And number 5, we have planet charts. So documentation, you want to document what was the weather. Was it clear out? Were there any kind of clouds? Was there fog? Was there moisture in the air, because that can change barometric pressure, things of that nature. Description of the craft: was it triangular? Was it a cigar-shaped craft? Was it a teardrop craft? Was it a boomerang? There's a lot of craft out there. The movement, like I said, zigzag. There 1 minute, gone the next second. Distance and duration, you want to, if you can't get a picture, video or picture is the next one. A lot of these things don't like getting their pictures taken or video taken, so they won't actually show up very well. But distance and duration, what time to start, what time to finish, and how far away was it. Kind of compare it to, was it airline height, or was it lower? And atmospheric anomalies. So getting into the history, I get asked all the time, well, when did the first abductions start? Well, actually, the first abductions documented were in the 11th century. So it goes back a ways. So as we go here, 4th BC, in 214 BC, actually, UFOs in the sky over Rome, as recorded by Titius Livius, or Livy, who was a Roman recorder. We'll come down to 4000 BC in Kiev. And these are all documented, very well documented, actually. So in 4500 BC in Iraq, reptilian artifacts. So this is what's interesting. You have cave paintings. In circa 500 BC in Utah by Native Americans, as well as in France. We're talking 2 different continents here. That everybody was seeing something. Was it aliens? I would be willing to bet, because aliens have been here a very long time, since basically the beginning of humanity. So 7,000 BC in Nepal. Shows a hovering disc-shaped object in the center and a small being resembling an alien. A gray, actually, is what we call it. Hold on. My computer's acting up here. So the circular pattern is reminiscent of the spiraling movement of consciousness. 10,000 BC. It depicts two beings in protective suits holding strange implements. Next, you got 1479. It's a woodcut. It was found in Saudi Arabia, complete with rivets and metal, and pointed front with stars gleaming in the background. So this is, I like this one actually. This is a tapestry that was found in Bruges, France. And they call it Summer's Triumph. It was created in 1538. It is in the Bayerische National Museum in Germany. You can see several disc-shaped objects on the top. They're kind of circled there for you. Now Columbus. So I'm going to read you my notes. That's why it's going to be a little bit longer, because I'm actually going to go into a lot more detail than what I did with the actual training. I didn't want to stand there and read notes. I knew most of the cases somewhat by heart, to an extent. There's so many, and like I said in the actual training, this is just barely a tip in the iceberg of the cases you can find that actually happened and are documented. I had to be real pick and choose, and there's a lot of famous cases I didn't even cover, like Rendlesham. So October 12th of 1492, the Columbus Journals. Columbus saw a UFO, the last place you would expect to find mentions of one such extraterrestrial craft in his journal. His family regarded the event as a significant one, and was mentioned several times in his heirs' writings. It began September 13th, when Columbus and the three ships under his command, which would be the Mayflower, Santa Maria, and Pinta. You can bash on me if you want, if I butcher the names or got them wrong. It's 8 o'clock in the morning while I'm doing this, so bear with me here, and I'm getting sick. So they were actually in the Bermuda Triangle, and this was back in 1492. The admiral observed that the needle of his compass started behaving erratically, and it was no longer pointing to the North Star. Repeated on the 17th and the 20th, Columbus wrote in his journal, the pilots observed the north point, found that the needles turned a full point to the west of north. So the mariners were alarmed and ejected, and did not give the reason. But the admiral knew, and ordered that the north should be again observed at dawn. They then found that the needles were true. The cause was that the, quote, the bright star makes the movement, and not the needles. This mentions of a bright star performing movements on the night sky is unusual by itself, but when combined with the events that followed, it paints an unorthodox picture. To his closest people, Columbus actually, talked a lot more. But at 10 p.m. on October 11th, Columbus was patrolling the deck of the Santa Maria. The morale of his crew was low, and they were homesick and wanted to go back to Spain. So he's walking the decks. He's thinking. At 10 o'clock, he saw a light glimmering in the distance. He couldn't tell if it was touching down or not. He called Pedro Gutierrez, a gentleman of the King's Bedchamber, and said there seemed to be a light, and they should look at it. He also saw it. So during that night, the light disappeared and reappeared several times while changing its altitude. So, you can kind of rule out it's not, you know, back then they didn't know so much about planets or whatnot. So, you could think it was a star that was rising at the horizon or whatnot. But this particular light, and this is straight from his journal, in sudden and passing gleams, according to other sources, the light was initially spotted beneath the waves and later ascended into the sky. So ufologists had drawn a conclusion long before us. They believe that Christopher Columbus encountered a UFO, or what we call a USO, which is an unidentified submergible object. It happens all the time. Lights under the ocean. The Navy encounters them. So, the historical importance of his journey has given rise to the suspicion that Columbus's expedition was closely monitored by an extraterrestrial craft piloted by a crew whose motives remain unknown. Other than that, you gotta figure this is kind of not necessarily the beginning, but kind of an advancement of the human race as he's, finding new continents. Also, the timing of the sighting is further proof the aliens were well aware of Columbus's plan and difficulties. It's a challenging theory one the skeptics would have a hard time agreeing with. But the vast number of sightings and evidence spanning thousands of years are a clear indicator that sometimes the most rational explanation doesn't fit. So April 14th of 1561, we're moving along here. You have the Nuremberg UFO fight in the sky around sunrise. Multiple witnesses saw these discs, tubes, and globes. And this is actually, when I was stationed in Kitzingen, I was only about, 30 to 45 minutes of Nuremberg. And they still talk about this in Germany. It is described as a sort of battle in the sky, much like a dogfight in World War II. UFOs are commonplace in Germany, and they have no problem talking about them. Unlike here, where you get, ridiculed or put down for believing in UFOs. But in Germany, anything paranormal is completely acceptable. Oh, and I forgot to tell you. Grab your coffee, smoke your cigarettes, enjoy this presentation. So moving along, 7 August of 1566. Kind of a similar situation if you look at it. In Basel, Switzerland. Kind of the same looking scenario, or close picture. Citizens saw numerous spherical objects appear in the sky. And that's an exact description of the one I saw in Kitzingen, actually. No, Bad Windsheim. Never mind. I was stationed in Illesheim then for my first UFO. And that was a giant orange orb that was over Bad Windsheim. And I hovered there for about 5 minutes, and just like you turn the light out, it disappeared. That was my very first actual UFO sighting. So you look at these, they aren't orange, they're black, the ones in Switzerland here. So citizens of Basel saw numerous spherical objects appear in the sky. The objects flew at high speed, seemed to do a fight in the sky. It's depicted in a 16th century woodcut by Samuel Coxius, or Samuel Coach, and Samuel Apiarius. So next slide, you have 1710, a painting of John the Baptist. It's actually in the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge, England. Artist is Eric de Gelder. So it's a dish-shaped object. It's shining beams of light down on John the Baptist and Jesus. And if you look at it, it's a classic silvery-shaped UFO. So you look at it, and what could have inspired the artist? I mean, seriously. if you look in the Bible, you see Ezekiel's wheel, perfect description of UFO. So we might do a show one day on in S4 on religion and UFOs. Might be an interesting topic, because even the Muslims, believe in UFOs. So next slide, you got June 12, 1790. There's an explosion in France. Police Inspector Liabou did an alien investigation in the summer of 1790. Many witnesses from around France saw what they described as a red globe flying over the farmlands. It soon landed on a hill and emitted an immense heat that burned the area around it. After a crowd gathered around the object, a door opened. A man-like being emerged. It spoke in a strange language and disappeared in the woods. And soon after, the craft exploded. So before we get into the 40s, this is an interesting case. Happened in 1803 in Boone, Japan. Local fishermen reported a vessel that was drifting in close by waters. They say that when they investigated it, a beautiful young woman, quote, they described as having red and white hair. that was unheard of back then. 1800s, red and white hair. So obviously culturally different. Dressed in strange clothes. The fishermen claimed that she held a square box that no one was allowed to touch, and she spoke to them in a language they never heard before. So many UFO believers think the story was a credible document of a close encounter of a third kind. One of these days I'll go over the phases of encounters. You got close encounters of the first kind, which is a sighting. Close encounters of the second kind is a landed craft. Close encounters of the third kind is actual interaction. Fourth kind is abduction. And now they have a fifth kind, a close encounter of a fifth kind, which is a contactee. So there, we went over it. But historians and ethnologists consider this to be folklore. Is it? It could be. It could be, but still a very interesting case. So now we get to the 1940s. And what we're also going to go into, which I didn't cover in the actual training, is all the different government programs that have gone on throughout the last 50, 60 years involving UFOs. It shows you the government's, got their pulse and got their eyes out and just don't want people to know. So why would that be? Well, many reasons, and we'll kind of cover that in this presentation, actually. I want to say, too, yesterday morning, we actually got a UFO report from the UK of 2 boomerangs that were about 100 feet diameter, or 100 feet long, wingspan. And they shot off, kind of freaked out the witnesses. I don't support MUFON. They're sold out by Bigelow. I do support Peter Davenport of NUFORC, which is the National UFO Reporting Center here in Seattle, actually, and Filer's Files. Not sure where he stands, if he's a sellout from Bigelow or not, but I do get weekly reports from Filer's Files, and if you do a Google search for just George Filer, you'll find you can actually get email updates every week. So in the 1940s, a lot happened. And you've got a breakdown here. We're going to go over each one with pictures. I like pictures. Pictures kind of show you a little more of what's going on. And so we're going to start with the Foo Fighters. Now, nobody knows really what the Foo Fighters were. So during World War II, Foo Fighter sightings by hundreds of pilots They're like an orange, or not orange, like a clear luminescent orb that followed our fighter pilots around. They're photographed with strange discs and balls that would fly near them. Most people think that they're alien in nature and are watching us destroy ourselves. Now, there's a lot of theories about them, though, because, you got to remember in World War II, Hitler was doing a lot of experimenting with crazy science, I guess you could say, with, being blunt. He had what was called the Bell. He was doing a lot of crazy stuff. So was this German? Some people think it was. It could very well have been. But I know the Russians were thinking it was us. The Germans thought it was us. We thought it was them. Nobody knew who it was. And nobody's ever taken credit for it. So, February 24th, 1942, the Battle of Los Angeles. Excellent movie. Very, obviously dramatized movie. But was based on a real event. In 1942, at 10:30 p.m. in Los Angeles, the Coast Guard and U.S. Navy detected something flying over the coast. It was something they had never identified before. It could hover in place and moved about quickly at the same time. They fired over 1,400 rounds of 12.8-pound anti-aircraft artillery at this UFO over the course of hours. This really happened. It did no damage. Did nothing to this craft. It just took off. Since then, they have made movies about it. It's not unusual to see a UFO during wartime, though no one is quite sure if they are monitoring events or trying to prevent a global catastrophe. It was witnessed by millions of people, and they even had the air raid sirens go off. So it was a very real event that we actually fired on. So next we have the Maury Island incident. Now, bear in mind, this is before Roswell. This is about 3 days before Roswell happened, roughly. Happened here in Washington State. Very large event. Now, the thing to remember, too, is Harold Dahl, on his deathbed, said it never happened. So, I'm only presenting the facts as they come out. So what happened, Harold Dahl was out scavenging for drifting logs, claimed to have seen 6 UFOs near Maury Island, which is a peninsula of Vashon Island, for those that are familiar with the local area of Seattle, anyway. Near Tacoma, in the Puget Sound. His son and their dog were on the boat. He took a number of photographs of this UFO, reported that one UFO shed some type of hot slag onto his boat. The slag killed his dog and injured his son. So, even on his deathbed, he can claim what he wants, but if it's documented that his dog was killed and his son was injured, something happened. So the next morning, Dahl reported a man arrived at his home and invited him to breakfast at a nearby diner. Dahl accepted the invitation. He described the man as imposing at over 6 feet tall and muscular and wearing a black suit. So here comes the man in black. The man drove a new 1947 Buick. Dahl assumed he was a military or government representative. While the two ate, Dahl claimed the man told him details of the UFO sighting. But bear in mind, Dahl hadn't talked about this publicly. So where did this guy come from? The man also gave Dahl a warning that he took as a threat that his family might be harmed if he talked about the sighting. So there's some confusion and debate over Dahl's statements, whether they occurred or not, but Dahl later claimed the UFO sighting was a hoax, but he also claimed the sighting was accurate. But he claimed it was a hoax to avoid bringing harm to his family. So, you know, you look at that, that makes sense. Did it happen? I think it did. So, in spite of the threat, Dahl reported the incident to his employee at his sawmill operation, Fred Chrisman, who was also an experiencer of unusual phenomena. He was the owner or co-owner of the boat used by Dahl. They had a joint venture to retrieve drifting logs in the Puget Sound as a source for raw lumber. So Crispin sailed to the island the following day and said he spotted a craft briefly, but it went behind a cloud. He gathered more of the slag, which he found littering the beach. So, you know, here you have physical evidence about the slag. And that comes into play here later on. So, in the 1940s, you had Ray Palmer, who was a science fiction writer. He wrote amazing science fiction. So they got Ray Palmer involved. And they sent him some of the slag. So while the, quote, rock formation, unquote, was being passed around in Chicago, the famous sighting by Kenneth Arnold took place. We'll get to Kenneth Arnold here shortly, actually, because I believe he's the next case. So Kenneth Arnold's the one who actually saw the UFOs flying over Mount Rainier, and it happened 2 days later. But they got a hold of Kenneth Arnold and asked him to investigate the incident because Arnold was writing for one of Palmer's publications. Arnold flew from Boise, Idaho to Tacoma and met with Chrisman and Dahl and 3 military intelligence officers at the Winthrop Hotel in Tacoma. So during the meetings over several days, an unknown person began leaking details of the UFO sighting at Maury. The meeting in the hotel room and details of the conversation there to reporters at the Tacoma Times and the United Press. So an anonymous caller also contacted the Seattle PI and the Boise Statesman. So 2 United States Army Air Corps investigating officers arrived at Arnold's request. A Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown of Army A2 Intelligence decided to fly back to Hamilton Field the same day they arrived in Tacoma after interviewing Chrisman in his hotel room. So Dahl decided to leave, citing danger to himself if the story got out, because he apparently received warnings from the Man in Black too. So the plane they're flying that was carrying the sludge, crashed near Kelso, Washington, shortly after leaving Tacoma, and both Air Force officers were killed. So in April of 2007, it was reported that the crash site had been rediscovered and some material recovered. Although the initial military investigation did recover exhibits and remove the bodies, the FBI report notes that the investigators from a cornfield near Tacoma, that'd be JBLM now, Joint Base Lewis McChord, had investigated the wreckage and were convinced there was no sabotage involved. The FBI report further mentions that 2 other people on board the airplane survived by parachuting from the airplane after it was lost. It lost its left wing in the tail section due to a fire in the left engine. So one of the survivors was named as a member of the flight crew. The other was referred to as a quote-unquote hitchhiker. The Seattle Post Intelligencer identified them as Sergeant Elmer Taft and Technical Sergeant Woodrow D. Matthews. Initially, the Air Force denied the men had been carrying a secret cargo, but in later years admitted that they had been officially investigating the Dahl report. And that's common too. That, you know, that they'll deny it and it'll come out later that, well, actually, we really were. So moving along with the case, Arnold found himself, Kenneth Arnold that is, unable to complete the story for Palmer. Samples of the slag provided to Arnold and Palmer allegedly went missing. Arnold was allegedly advised by Ted Morello of the United Press, quote, "You're involved in something that is beyond our power here to find out anything about. Get out of this town until whatever it is blows over." So, anytime there's a real serious case like this, people get threatened. Arnold decided to fly home. He stopped for fuel in Pendleton, Oregon, and shortly after taking off again, his engine froze in midair. He managed to land the plane safely despite the emergency. Paul Lance of the Tacoma Times died within 2 weeks of undetermined causes. United Press stringer Ted Morello moved to New York until his death due to a stroke on September 15th, 2007, at the age of 88, was a well-respected newspaper correspondent to the United Nations. Some believe the case was allegedly a disabled UFO. The Roswell UFO incident took place about 12 days after Dall's sighting, although various dates circulate among Roswell investigators, and the chronology is less certain than that for the Mort Allen incident. You look at these kind of cases, and these are historical. So June 24th, 1947. You have the Kenneth Arnold sighting. It's also known as the Mount Rainier sighting. So June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw 9 unidentified flying objects near Mount Rainier in Washington. They were shiny and metallic and were traveling at upwards of 1,200 miles an hour. Because of the shape of the crafts, Kenneth Arnold called them flying saucers. Well, once the press picked that up, the name stuck. So he's actually the one that coined the term flying saucers. So June 29th, 1947, you got the White Sands, New Mexico UFO crash. 1997, in the White Sands Desert of New Mexico. Actually, 1947, correction. Witness C.J. Zone witnessed a glowing white UFO, caught it on film crashing to Earth. It skipped a few times before bursting into flames. Next, we got Roswell. We all know about Roswell. So June 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, Roswell UFO crash, possibly the most famous UFO crash, happened outside Roswell, New Mexico. Officer Walter Hout issued a statement that they recovered a metallic disc with alien bodies inside. Later, he retracted the statement. There's a picture of him in the slideshow. Actually, there were 2 crashes. The one in Roswell. There was another craft that the 2 craft actually collided. The other one went over Texas and landed and crashed in Mexico country. Now, Project Sign, and we're gonna get to a lot more in depth with the projects. But so December 30th, 1947, Air Force formed Project Sign, headed by Professor J. Allen Hynek, to investigate UFO sightings around the country. Now, why would and then you got Project Blue Book, kind of the different name, same project. And it went from 1947, supposedly ended in 1969. I don't think so. They just, called it something different and kept it going. February 11th, 1949, you have Project Grudge. So, again, reading from the slide, inside the military, Project Sign had been known as Project Saucer. So the existence of the group was leaked to the press, so they changed their name to Grudge. It was terminated by the Air Force supposedly December 27th, 1949. I don't think so. They always do that crap. Okay, so we're moving along to the 1950s. And we do go up to current times. So I think the newest case I've got in this presentation is 2012. But these cases still happen today all the time. There's a lot more secrecy involved. People don't talk about it anymore. But what's unique about these older cases like this, because they have pictures, they have photographic evidence. Back then, 35 millimeter cameras and older, the 1940s cameras, you couldn't fake that. It's not like a digital camera today that you can fake, use Photoshop and alter the pictures and whatnot. Back then, you took a picture, it was a hard picture, and it couldn't really be faked. So 1950s, May 11th, in McMinnville, Oregon. And they actually have a celebration they do every year for this. But Evelyn Trent was walking from feeding her livestock, and she looked up and she saw this metallic disc-shaped object heading in her direction. She yelled for her husband Paul, who was in the house at the time. They took 2 pictures. And again, you see the picture there in the slideshow. You couldn't fake these pictures. Now, okay, so you have cases where people took pictures of hubcaps hovering and whatnot. That's how you faked pictures back then. That is obviously not. The McMinnville is one of the more famous Oregon UFO sighting cases. So 1952, 1953, the Robertson Report began. It was created by the CIA, of course. I hate the CIA. Based on President Truman's desire for an assessment of the UFO problem. So, what would be a problem with UFOs? Well, one, if they can't control it, then it's a threat to national security. That could be an issue, especially as you'll see in some of the reports later on. They can actually shut down missile silos to turn off the power. Now, in that next case, July 12th to the 29th, was a UFO wave over D.C. Top secret, secure airspace. And you want to talk about disclosure. Today, we had disclosure back in the 1950s with this. There was radar tracking. There were lights in the sky that were unexplained. Nobody could explain what these lights were. And there's pictures. So multiple sightings between July 12th and the 29th happened around the Capitol, even in no-fly airspace by the White House. They were picked up on multiple radar tracking. So you want disclosure right there. Okay, so it wasn't a president stepping out to, verify it, but it folks, the evidence is there. So September 12th, 1952 was the Flatwoods Monster. Unique case. Around 7 at night, 3 kids told one of their parents about them seeing something flying across the sky in Flatwoods, West Virginia, and possibly crash. So the parent, Kathleen May, took 5 children and a guardsman to go investigate. When arriving, she said she saw what looked like a large pulsating ball of fire to the right. To the left, she reported seeing a 10-foot tall creature that made a shrilling, hissing noise as she pointed her light to it, at which time they all ran in terror. That's all we know about that one. I'm sure there's more, but, for time, I only get the basics. So, November 23rd, 1953, near Sioux Locks over Lake Superior, U.S.-Canada, U.S. Air Force pilot and radar operator and their F-89C disappeared while pursuing an unidentified radar return. So it was the disappearance of First Lieutenant Felix Moncia and Robert Wilson. And this happens often, where airline pilots, Air Force pilots will disappear. Next we have, 1954. President Eisenhower. And there's been a lot of shows done on this. I know Spaced Out Radio did, I think Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott actually talked to the dentist that supposedly Eisenhower went to during his disappearance. The dentist said he never went there. But Eisenhower disappeared for, I think it was 2 days. And, theory says that he went to Holloman Air Force Base and met with aliens and made a contract. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because the arrangement between the alien, there's a lot of argument over which race it was, whether it was the Nordics. I don't think it was. I think it was the Greys. But the arrangement itself was that the whatever alien race it was given permission to abduct humans in America in exchange for technology. This is 1954. If you look at a jump in technology, especially in the last 20 years, 30 years, you got the cell phones, you've got fiber optics, the L came out of it, you've got spy planes, the silent triangular craft that the Air Force flies. You've got computers. Look at the internet and the way computers jump. I'm not saying humans are stupid, but as rapid as technology jumped, no, I think there's a little more to it. So to me, it lends a little more credence to the story and the contract that was made. And it kind of goes back to disclosure. How is a government going to disclose to people that, yes, there's UFOs and, yep, they're abducting people, and we actually made a contract that they could do that? You just sold the American people down the river. Are you really going to want that to get out? I don't think so. Especially the fact that you cannot control these craft. They can do whatever they want. So, there's not going to be disclosure, folks. I agree with Markham and Dave with, soft disclosure over the years. Look at the movies that came out. Close Encounters of a Third Kind was an example. You got Independence Day 2, where they actually, shoot down the good aliens, and they still win in the end. But, you got a lot of alien movies that came out that kind of show soft disclosure to an extent. This next case is interesting because this happened in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, August 21st and 22nd, 1955. So, there's a sighting of a dish-shaped aircraft that landed, I believe, in the field behind the barn. A group of strange goblin-like creatures approached the farmhouse. They were looking in the windows and tapping on the windows, and so members of there are two families in this house. They shot at them several times, no effect. It lasted from evening to dawn, which is why it was a 2-day period. But according to reports, the entities were actually doing somersaults to avoid the shotgun pellets. These are actual, drawings. Yeah, I'm going to make you yawn, I know. But these are actual drawings of the beings from the family. And they do look like goblins. I'll give them that. The next case we got, so this is an interesting abduction case. Happened in 1957, October 16th and 17th. Was the Antonio Villas Boas. Let me back up though, because I do have a couple cases I want to bring up that I don't have slides for. May 20th of 1957, you have the Milton Torres incident. That was a radar picked up a UFO over East Anglia, the UK, and the U.S. military ordered pilot Milton John Torres to intercept it. When he approached the UFO, he prepared to fire. Suddenly, the UFO shot off at incredible speeds. The day after the encounter, he was met by a man in a blue coat that briefed him and told him he was never allowed to talk about it. He told him if he ever talked about it, he'd lose his pilot's license, and it would be the end of his flying days. These are common, folks. We have a lot of UFO sightings by airline pilots, both Air Force and civilian. And they are to fill out a report for the FAA. And that report goes straight to the Bigelow Industries. It doesn't get seen by the public, so you don't hear about it. Really pisses me off. So June 17th of 1957, you have the RB-47 UFO encounter. Happened in Topeka, Kansas. It's often listed as a top 10 UFO case because the U.S. Air Force RB-47 is equipped with the most advanced monitoring equipment. It tracked for 700 miles, or it was tracked for 700 miles by UFO. So, getting back to Antonio Villas-Boas, this is kind of a bizarre case. So, farmer Antonio Villas-Boas claimed to have been abducted and examined by humanoid aliens while working in the fields at night. He also claimed to have had sex with an alien woman aboard the egg-shaped craft. Boas had been found to be suffering from radiation poisoning. And Fontes, who was the investigator, was curious. Among the symptoms were pains throughout the body, nausea, headaches, loss of appetite, ceaselessly burning sensations in the eyes, cutaneous lesions at the slightest of light bruising, which went on appearing for months, looking like small reddish nodules, harder than the skin around them and protuberant, painful when touched, each with a small central orifice yielding a yellowish, thin, waterish discharge. So, you've got something physical. So it leads to a tangible case. So the skin surrounding the wounds presented a hyperchromatic, violet-tinged area. The military intelligence man interrogated Boas, and he was subject to a battery of physical and psychological tests. The most conservative ufologists accept his abduction as an actual occurrence. Interesting. Very much interesting. Especially due to the extreme nature of the case. So the last one for the 1950s we've got is the Dyatlov Pass Russian encounter, February 2nd and 3rd of 1959. Now, is it UFO related? Is it abduction related? Nobody really knows. So if you look at this slide, it was 9 college students that went on a trek. They went on an excursion over Dyatlov Pass in Russia. The picture on the left you see was on the film one of the last pictures that these students took. And when they got to the scene of this event, so the students set up camp. What the investigators found was nothing ripped into the tent. It was actually ripped from the inside going out, like they were terrified and trying to get out of the tent. On 3 of the students, the eyes were removed, the tongues were cut out, I believe part of the lip was cut out, and we're not talking predators here, we're talking like with surgical precision, or laser precision. There was radiation burns, I believe, if I remember right, the bones were crushed. Very bizarre case. Now, many theories say it could have been a military experiment gone wrong. Was it aliens? Nobody knows. Just a very bizarre event. Now we're getting to the 60s. Always fun. So what I don't have on the slides again is the Australia, June 22nd, 26th and 27th, 1959, you got Australia, Father Gill incident. So, Australian Father William Booth Gill, a missionary, and many natives that were with him saw several UFOs, one of them seeming to be repaired by 4 human-like occupants. Witnesses and aliens waved at each other. Interesting, huh? The case was investigated by J. Allen Hynek, and accompanied by other sightings. As dark was beginning to close in, he sent Eric Kodawara for a torch, otherwise known as a flashlight, and directed a series of long dashes towards the UFO. You know, I did this once in Germany as my second sighting. I shone a flashlight at this pulsating craft, and it shot down. It was about star level, looked like a star, and it shot down to about, I wasn't drunk, I don't do drugs. It shot down to about airline level, and it just hovered and flashed. It hovered for about 5 minutes, and then shot back up to where its original point was. So I can relate to this case because they shone a flashlight at this. After a minute or two of this, the UFO apparently acknowledged by making several wavering motions back and forth. Waving by us was repeated, and this followed by more flashes of the torch. Then the UFO began slowly to become bigger, apparently coming in their direction. Folks, that's when you run and call Forest Moon Paranormal. We'll come out and check it out. It ceased after perhaps half a minute and came no further. After a further 2 to 3 minutes, the figures apparently lost interest in us, further disappeared below deck. Quote. So at 6:25 p.m., two figures reappeared to carry on with whatever they were doing before the interruption. The blue spotlight came on for a few seconds, twice in succession. Father Gill described how he and the mission people called out to the men, even shouting at them and beckoning them to descend. But there's no response beyond what has already been noted. So two smaller UFOs higher up remained stationary, probably, observers, make sure nothing happened. By 6:30 p.m., the scene remained largely unchanged, and Gill records that he went to dinner. So, critics are saying, why would someone walk away from such an extraordinary sight? Well, he was always asked that question, and if they ain't going to respond, then why are you going to hang around? Yeah, that'd be my answer. So having had about 4 hours of this sight on Friday night, we were not nearly so interested when it returned on Saturday night, especially after we were unable to persuade it to land. And that was Father Gill talking. There's nothing eerie or otherworldly about any of it. It was so ordinary as a Ford car. It looked a perfectly normal sort of object, an Earth-made object. And some people might think of this as a flying saucer. But Father Gill took it as a kind of hovercraft that the Americans or Australians have built. Now, and we don't exactly know where in Australia this was, but we do have Pine Gap. Now, I'm not sure exactly when Pine Gap was built, but think about it. There's UFO sightings all over around Pine Gap all the time. So it could be a Pine Gap type event. Okay, so now we get back on track with the presentation here with the 1960s Sheffield, Massachusetts. So the Thomas Reed family. So the evidence in this case would include a significant amount of radiation and strong magnetic fields, and is one of a few to have been collected and documented by law enforcement. It includes a history of testimony gleaned from conscious recollection, my favorite, and we'll get to that. I don't like hypnotherapy per se. Conscious recollection is the best way. An abundance of documentation, administrative testing, and official reports, followed by dark consequence. The history involves Marion Burroughs, the grandmother, Nancy Reed, the mother, and the two brothers, Thom and Matthew. So they lived in Sheffield, Massachusetts in the 1960s. Thomas, who was 6, and his younger brother Matthew experienced life-altering events. So due to their vulnerable age, these encounters had an enormous impact on them, crushing their belief system, which is common, and denying the two boys the reality, normalcy, and spirit. Both have conscious memories of lengthy experiences with non-human entities and being taken aboard a tarnished circular-looking vessel where an image of a willow tree was displayed. Now, that's kind of unique and still remains embedded in the mind of Thomas to this day. So during the fall evening in Massachusetts, and after a barrage of bright bursts of light, a flash fired through their bedroom window. Tom was engulfed, and Matthew was now speaking to an empty bed. Can you imagine that? You're talking to your brother, and all of a sudden he's gone. So an odd stillness accompanied the light and seemed to be what left their mother, Nancy, and their grandmother, Marion, in a cataleptic state in an adjacent room. Matthew ran to his mother, only to find her in this unresponsive state from which he could not wake her. So once she partially regained her senses, Nancy headed to the boy's room, but before reaching the room, heard a cross between a loud screech and a door slamming. Matthew was no longer beside her. So, now alone in the home with only the grandmother, who stayed at home while Nancy began to frantically search for their 80-acre horse farm on horseback, where she eventually spotted them from the Appalachian Trail. Tom and Matthew were about 15 feet away from each other on a wide dirt path, eyes locked on one another, heavily shaken and in need of care. According to Nancy, the boys were visibly suffering from shock. She stated Tom was not responding at all. Their mother and grandmother gave them fluids, wiped the boys down with washcloths, and wrapped them in warm blankets. As they did so, Tom started staring at a metal bottle top that Matthew was toying with, watching as it reacted strangely to his brother's touch. That's what you call a magnetic field. Ooh, the wind's picking up here. So the adults watched over the boys until they dozed off on the living room sofa next to a fire. The later encounter of 1969 involved 4 members of the Reed family. And the night that would finally drive them to sell their home, property, and restaurant. The Village on the Green was the name of the restaurant. So getting a little deeper into this, Marion, I believe was the grandmother. Yeah. It was 8 o'clock at night. Marion referred to a bright floating strip mall, quote unquote, above the left side of the station wagon. So the family spoke of what was felt as some sort of force, a tingling vibe running through their bodies before the car coasted to a stop off to the right side of the road. Only the sounds of stones tapping under the fender wells of their car were heard, followed by dead silence. A barometric change in pressure was also felt before a deafening eruption of katydids and crickets. The family has collectively been able to reconstruct and piece together much of that night. Tom's recollection is one of disturbing accounts. In a large, dark room, long, brightly illuminated hallways under a body encompassing chamber or cylinder, and crying out for one another. So, many have asked how the beings appeared, and there's been a lot of speculation on the terminology. But Thom has described the beings which were witnessed as being a genetically engineered or manufactured intelligent insect-type being with some human characteristics such as hands that would stand on 2 feet and vary from 3 to 5 feet in height. So what this sounds like to me is either the Greys or the Mantids. The Greys don't look so insect-like the Mantids do. So that's why I kind of go with the Mantid race. After their return to the vehicle, the family experienced a period of disorientation, where it was said that the car was facing a different direction than when it had come to a stop earlier. And we'll get to that because it's happened in other cases too, where there's been a lot of abductions where the whole car was picked up, and when they returned them, they were actually driving the wrong direction on the freeway. Whereupon the aliens re-picked up the car and fixed it. Nice of them. They don't want to be found out. Anyway, Thomas ran to his grandmother, who was wandering aimlessly in the middle of the road. Nancy cataleptic in the passenger seat, but had been driving earlier. Matthew was unconscious in the fetal position in the back seat. Several years later, Nancy married Howard Reed and recounted her family's history with UFOs and non-human entities as far back as 1954 in Moosehead Lake, Maine. This ran in stark contrast to Howard's political aspirations, the position he held in local office, and his high standing in the community. Well, yeah, that wouldn't go over too well, huh? By the 1980s, Thom's father, attorney Howard Reed, Ph.D., met attorney Robert Bletchman, who became Thom's personal attorney, spent years reviewing the Reed case, even locating corresponding reports, supportive testimony, to include several dozen witnesses. Robert discovered supporting documentation, including an incident in August of 1969, where J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée rating was assigned to the South Egremont Country Club case that placed a craft over the Reed's property. Many of the witnesses who gave testimony in '69 were just 7 miles from the Reed home. In 1992, the Reed's case would assist Bletchman by adding credible and corroborating evidence, to include the Reed statements on the barometric change of pressure, electromagnetic vibe, calming state, and the manipulation of gravity, all of which was voiced in support of other cases by Robert at the United Nations Symposium on October 2nd of 1992. So now you're getting a little more current. So the objective of the symposium was to introduce substantiated cases to motivate the UN to reconsider 33 out of 426 references an established agency or department of the UN for undertaking, coordinating, and disseminating the results of research into UFOs. So this came 10 days before NASA began SETI's Microwave Observing Project, or MOP. The United Nations mention was a testament to the caliber and seriousness of the Reed case. What prompted the Reed case to resurface after several decades were the brothers' encounters 40 years later. The evidence in the encounter of March 30th of 2009. Now you're getting common. And this is kind of my point, where you show family interaction. Entire families are affected by this, all the way back to generations. So the evidence in March 30th of 2009 involving Matthew in Brownsburg, Indiana, was investigated by those in law enforcement, as well as aerospace groups. That's probably Bigelow. God, I hate that guy. So Matthew's SUV instrument panel was found to be damaged. Matthew was missing time. There was blood on his steering wheel and shirt. A rather high amount of radiation. It all sounds very similar with the Reed case. The magnetism would spin a compass needle from a distance of 2 feet. Officer White, a detective with over 30 years of law enforcement, worked the case, reported it as authentic encounters with an unknown powerful force. And here we go. Robert Bigelow's involved. Imagine that. So he recently financed an organization and teams to investigate CE3 and CE4 cases, such as the Reed case. He probably bought them out. So STAR team and smaller third-party groups also investigated the Reed case. And all investigating personnel came to the same conclusion and validated the radiation, the magnetic anomalies, as well as medical records, statements, and testimony. This is an extensive case. That's why I'm reading you all the notes, so you get a broader, you get cases like this that are so documented by professionals. Kind of hard to dispute, obviously. So Detective White also took, in 2010, he took Thom to advanced polygraph. Thom passed, his test on his family's encounters, which covered the broad spectrum of events dating back to 66, with a score of over 99.1%, which was administered by a 30-year veteran police officer at the Department of Defense Polygraph Institute Advanced Polygraph. In 2006, Howard voices interest in a collective book project on the family's experiences with vessels and other life forms, to include a compilation of sensitive material gathered over the years. Now, Howard suffered untimely death by a virus of, quote, unknown origin on October 2nd, 14 years to the day after the Reed's case was mentioned at the United Nations Symposium, October 2nd of 1992. The CDC, on sweeping Howard's office, reported finding a vial containing the deadly virus on his air conditioning unit. He was murdered, folks. Basically murdered. The building was closed and remains closed to this day. October 6th was then proclaimed a day of remembrance in Howard's honor by the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, as he was strongly supported by Senator Christopher Dodd. Look that up. I think I will too. A PhD who releases test results regarding the Reed case, after evaluating family members on September 15th of 2010, was also found dead on November 12th of 2010, just 8 weeks later. See, people are disappearing, people are dying because of what they talk about. Kind of lends credence to it, doesn't it? In memory of Tom's father, a commemorative bench can be seen in the city green. Thomas Reed was a South Beach fashion photographer and the founder of Miami Models, with clients Polo Black Label, Tommy Hilfiger, and Ralph Lauren. He held positions of upper management with companies Honeywell and Entergy. On that, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to this. All right, next case we got. We're talking Betty and Barney Hill. I like this case. It happened September 19th of 1961 on Route 3 of New Hampshire. Now, what's curious about this case, and bear in mind it's the 1960s, and they're cruising down, Highway 3. And you're going to hear my cats running around the background. Now it's about midnight, so been a few hours since we did the first hour of this presentation. But they notice a strange light zigzagging in the sky. And they pull over and watch this light. And got back in the car, and before they knew it, this craft was blocking the road, and there were beings in the middle of the road. The car stalled, and suddenly they knew something had happened. As it turns out, they were abducted and gone for a while. So what's unique about this particular case is they went to their church, and their church actually had a hypnotherapist in the congregation. So they were both independently, separately hypnotized, or put under therapy, and both described the same thing. And Betty actually drew what the aliens described to her as a star chart, or as the map of where they were from, which the diagram is on your PowerPoint. And turns out, years later, if you look on the right, both the top and the bottom. So the bottom right picture you're looking at on your PowerPoint is what Betty drew, and the top picture is actually Zeta Reticuli star system, and it wasn't found out until like the 1990s. That particular star system was. So you're talking a case that was from the 1960s that actually drew a star chart of a system that wasn't even known back then. You're talking. There's been cases of abduction that were documented back in the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, Italy, Brazil, around the world, globally, and they're all documented, described in very similar circumstance. So these are things we deal with. Now, it's not on the PowerPoint, but July 1st, 1965, in Valençon, France, on the date, a farmer, Maurice Mass, in Alpes de Haute province, France, heard a strange noise. He saw what he described as a large orb the size of a car. When he got closer, he saw two small, 1 meter tall aliens near the orb with light gray skin. When they noticed him, he says he used a device on him that froze him, and they talked in a strange language. Then they ascended into the air, into their ship, and they left. So, 1965, 1968, so December 9th of 1965, you got the Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO crash. Now, there's a lot of different sides of the field on this one. The skeptics say it didn't happen. A lot of witnesses say it did happen. The craft in question crashed in some woods. Numerous witnesses went to the crash site, and then all of a sudden the military showed up, cordoned off the area. The witnesses were told to keep quiet and to go home. And then everybody saw the military roll off with a flatbed semi with this object under tarps. That would be the Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO crash. It was a brilliant fireball that dropped debris, caused sonic booms, alleged intimidation of a reporter by men in black, and cover up in the unresolved death of different witnesses. So it was 4:47 p.m. when it came out of the sky from the northwest, a flaming object that went from Canada, Ohio, and into western Pennsylvania. It appeared to be guided, changed its path, and made a level descent away from residential areas and into the woods of Kecksburg. The first people on the scene said it was partially buried in the ground. It was made of metal between 10 and 12 foot long, generally shaped like an acorn. There were strange markings on the band near the bottom that resembled hieroglyphics. The military was there within an hour, and by 8 it was gone. So, that's a quick response. To me, that's a military quick response team for them to be there that fast and out. Because even having been through, Army safety schools and whatnot, if there's a military helicopter crash, for example, they don't move nothing. They can be cordoned off and guarded for days for a helicopter crash. This particular one, it wasn't anything military. They packed it off. Now, the argument is, if you look at the acorn-shaped craft on the right side there, it very much resembles the German Nazi bell. So, the skeptics sit there and they think it could be possibly, a government experiment using the German Nazis' bell. It could be a satellite, things of that nature. You never know. So April 6, 1966, the Westfall, Australia case. This one's kind of cool. I like this case because, you have countless witnesses. So in Australia, it's the most famous UFO sighting with over 200 witnesses. At the Westfall High School in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, hundreds of children and educators saw a UFO hover and land near the school at approximately 11 a.m. Afterwards, military units showed up and told everyone not to talk about what they saw. Why the cover-up? Makes you wonder. Now, April 17th, 1966, Portage County, Ohio. You've got police chasing a UFO. Two officers, Dale Stower and Wilbur Neff, saw a large disc-shaped UFO. They chased the UFO in Mahoning County, Ohio, where they had to stop their pursuit because they're out of their jurisdiction. Other officers in the other jurisdiction continued the chase, but weren't able to keep up. All right, so, some of these cases I didn't get into a whole lot during the actual presentation. This is going to be a lot longer because I'm actually going to go into details with them, especially the Andreessen abduction. So, with this one, it happened January 25th, 1967. in Ashburnham, Massachusetts, a woman claims to have been taken aboard UFOs by aliens many times over a number of years. On the evening of January 25th, Betty Andreasen was in her kitchen in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. Her 7 children, mother, and father were in the living room. About 6:35 p.m., the house lights suddenly blinked out for a moment, and then a pulsating reddish-orange light shined in the kitchen window. Betty calmed the frightened children while her father rushed to look out the kitchen window. He saw a group of strange-looking small creatures approaching with a hopping motion. Now that kind of resembles the the Kentucky, the Kentucky case that we discussed earlier. 5 small humanoid creatures entered the house, passing right through the wooden door. Betty's family was immediately placed into suspended animation, a common sign you'll learn later on. One creature went over to her father. The leader of the 4 established telepathic communication with Betty. The leader was about 5 foot tall, and again, that's common. You'll have smaller grays or shorter grays, and there's usually one taller one that's in charge. So the others were about 4 foot tall, all had large pear-shaped heads, wide cat-like wraparound eyes, and diminutive ears and noses. Their mouths were immobile slits that reminded Betty of scar lines. Each wore a covered blue uniform adorned with a Sam Brown type belt. Pay attention to this part because you won't hear about insignias too often, but there's an insignia of a bird was affixed to their sleeves. Their hands had 3 digits. Later on the craft, they were gloved. They wore boot-like attire on their feet. They floated rather than walked. Betty's initial fright was immediately calmed by an overpowering sense of friendship. When she displayed concern for her family's welfare, the creatures temporarily released her 11-year-old daughter, Becky, from the strange state of unawareness to assure Betty that she was all right. Then Betty was taken outside, brought on board a small craft resting on the side of a hill that sloped into the backyard. The machine was about 20 feet in diameter. It looked like 2 saucers, one inverted upon the other. So it sounds kind of like the classic flying saucer type craft with a small superstructure on top. The small craft accelerated and apparently merged with a larger parent craft in which Betty was subjected to the effects of a strange equipment, a physical examination. Then she was taken to an alien place and given a bizarre object lesson that caused her to undergo a painful yet ecstatic religious-like experience. So again, this sounds more like the kind of maybe a combination race. One that does scientific experiments, the other one that does the social experiments. Later that night at 10:40 p.m., Betty was returned home by 2 of her alien captors. At home, she found her family still in a state of suspended animation. One being had stayed behind to watch over them during her absence. Then the beings put the family, still under some type of mind control, to bed, and the aliens left. Several times the aliens had told Betty that certain things had been locked in her mind. This is what we call downloads. She was instructed to forget them and her UFO experience until the appointed time. So she consciously remembered only a fraction of the strange encounter, the power, failure, the color light flashing through the window, and the aliens entering the house. Betty was a devout Christian and interpreted the creatures as religious or angelic in nature. And again, that's common. The subject of UFOs was largely unknown to her. Her education had been limited to 10 years of schooling. Her basic interests included family, church, and community-related activities. Not until much later did she think of her experience as a possible UFO encounter. So, in 1975, Betty responded to a local newspaper story about UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek. You should be familiar with that name by now. Who was soliciting personal UFO experience information from the public. Betty's letter contained such few data, however, that it was filed and forgotten until an investigation in January of 1977. There's been books written about her case. I suggest you look her up. It was one of the more phenomenal cases, actually. Next case we've got was May 20th, 1967, the Falcon Lake incident with Stefan Michalek. You look at the picture we've got there, and those are burn marks from the craft that he encountered. So Stefan Michalak claimed that while on vacation he saw two cigar-shaped UFOs land near him. He approached one of them and heard voices inside that didn't respond to him, trying to contact him in English. He burned himself on the craft and later, according to doctors, experienced hair loss and lack of appetite. Now, folks, that's usually an indicator of radiation sickness. The burn marks were the shape of a grid. Not on your slideshow, but September 7th of 1967 was the first documented animal mutilation case with, quote-unquote, Snippy the horse. You know what, cattle mutilations we will do another time. I think that's actually a presentation that'd be worth looking at. We need to do an S4 show on that as well and get Linda Moulton Howe involved in that one. 1969 Project Blue Book supposedly closed down. I don't think so. They just named it something else and moved on. That's where $20 million of your black budget goes. So January 6, 1969, Jimmy Carter had his own sightings before he became president. He said that he and about 20 other witnesses saw a UFO coming towards them from the west at about 7:15 p.m. It stopped before the trees and then turned from white to blue to red, then back to white, and took off again. You can look all these cases up. You'll find multiple information about them. And now we're off to the 1970s. So in 1973, J. Allen Hynek formed QFOS, the Center for UFO Studies. I don't think QFOS is around anymore. I'm not really sure. So October 11th, 1973 is the Hickson encounter. The strange case of 19-year-old Calvin Parker and 42-year-old Charles Hickson actually began a day before their famous encounter on October 10th of 1973. 15 different people, including 2 policemen, reported seeing a large silver UFO slowly fly over a housing project in the St. Tammany Parish of New Orleans, Louisiana. The 2 men were both from the town of Gautier, Mississippi, and were doing some fishing in the Pascagoula River. On a dark night, about 9 p.m., they suddenly heard a type of buzzing behind them. Both men turned around to see the source of the sound and were amazed to see a glowing, egg-shaped object with bluish lighting on its front side. The unusual craft was hovering just above, a few feet above the ground, about 30 feet from the shore of the river. To their unbelief, a door opened on the object and 3 strange beings began to float just above the water, straight towards them. Though the being had legs, they did not use them, they simply floated across the river. Now that's common. You'll actually hear about a lot of beings that float and they don't walk. Parker and Hickson would later describe the beings as about 5 feet tall, had bullet-shaped heads without necks, slits for mouths, and you can see a picture of it in the middle, along with the craft here on your presentation. Parker and Hickson would later, okay, we've got that, that where slits for mouths where their noses or eyes would be, they had thin conical objects sticking out, like carrots from a snowman's head. They had no eyes, gray wrinkled skin, round feet, and claw-like hands. So Hickson, frozen in fear and unbelief, was grabbed by 2 of these creatures, and the third one took Parker, who fainted from fright. Well, do you really blame him? Beings like that, they'd be kind of creepy. Hickson would later relate that when the beings put their arms around his body to support him, he felt numb all over. He was then floated into a brightly lit room inside the UFO. Inside the room, he floated along with an eye-like device, which examined him all over. After his ordeal, Hickson was left floating, while the beings left the room, probably to examine Parker. Approximately 20 minutes after the ordeal had begun, it was over, and Hickson was floated back outside the strange craft. Parker was crying and praying on the ground. Only a moment or 2 later, the red craft rose straight up into the air and disappeared. So, as the 2 men began to regain their composure, they were uncertain as to what they should do. That's where Forrest Moon Paranormal comes into play. we help people like this, but it's really not out there as to what you should do, and that needs to change. You go to MUFON, they're gonna take your report. Are they gonna help you? Probably not. They're gonna take your report and it's gonna go off to Bigelow Industries. New Fork is the only other one that I'm sure of that isn't bought out by Bigelow. So these are things we need to work on changing, folks. As the two men began to regain their composure, so they felt obligated to tell someone. Despite fearing ridicule, they telephoned Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi. Kessler referred their problem to the local sheriff's office. And again, you go to law enforcement with a story like that, you get to be treated like you're crazy. So afraid of what reaction they might get from law enforcement, they opted to instead drive to the local newspaper. Finding the office closed, they decided to take their bizarre story to the sheriff after all. Naturally, the sheriff felt that the two men's story was some kind of hoax, and to get to the truth, he put Hickson and Parker into a room which was wired for sound, hoping that they would slip up and reveal why they were perpetuating such a strange tale. So soon news of this event began to surface. The local press released the story first, quickly followed by the wire services, and within a few days the Pascagoula incident was major news all over the United States. The APRO, the Aerial Phenomenal Research Organization, sent University of California professor James Harder to investigate. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, representing the U.S. Air Force, also arrived to look into the story. Harder and Hynek interviewed Hickson and Parker together. Harder hypnotized Hickson, but he became so frightened that the session had to be aborted. The two abductees were encouraged to take a lie detector test, which they both passed. Harder and Hynek, both highly respected in their professions, believed the men's story. So that does say a lot. At a later date, Hynek stated there was definitely something here that was not terrestrial. In what may be a related incident a couple weeks after this chilling account, Coast Guardsmen and fishermen had an encounter with an underwater metallic object. That's what we call a USO. The strange object had an amber light on it, and the guard chased it in the Pascagoula River. You know, and FMP's actually had cases with clients where they described USOs going up rivers. So, firmly believe it. The object was close enough to touch, but each time it was prodded with a large bell hook, it would turn off its light, move a distance away, and turn its light back on. The unusual encounter lasted about 40 minutes before the craft disappeared. The Pascagoula encounter is one of the most unusual accounts of all UFO reports. Though the sighting and abduction involved only 2 witnesses, there were several other sightings of unusual flying objects on the same night. The 2 men have held to their story, though no earthly explanation has been offered for the strange events. So next slide we've got Medicine Bow, the Higdon abduction. Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming. Medicine Bow National Forest. Carl Higdon was elk hunting in the northern section of the park. As he shot his rifle at an elk that was nearby, a bizarre thing happened. The bullet traveled in slow motion as if he had entered another dimension. It fell some 50 feet away. Dropping into the snow-covered landscape, he was able to recover the bullet. He felt a strange sensation over his body. To his utter shock and amazement, he saw a humanoid entity standing nearby. The humanoid was quite tall, at over 6 feet in height. He was clad in a black jumpsuit with a white belt. The belt was decorated with a 6-pointed star, an emblem of yellow, with straight hair standing out from his head. He had no eyebrows. He stood bow-legged with long arms ending like rod-like appendages instead of hands. The humanoid spoke to Higdon, asked him if he was hungry. The entity threw some pills to him, telling him if he took one, he wouldn't have to eat for 4 days. Higdon normally did not take any type of pills, yet he swallowed one of the offerings immediately. It was surmised that the entity was smart enough to realize that Higdon may have been hungry, or else he wouldn't have been hunting elk. So soon the alien pointed towards Higdon. And the next thing he knew, he was enclosed with a transparent apparatus with a helmet on it. Also present were 2 more humanoids and the 5 elk he was previously stalking. The elk were in a frozen state. He was told the aliens were traveling to their home planet, located some 163,000 light years away. In a flash, they arrived at the distant location. Common. It's called a wormhole. Higdon described the surrounding landscape as being occupied with buildings like the Seattle Space Needle, all lit up by a sun of intense power. The brightness of the atmosphere caused Higdon's eyes to water, along with the aliens. Higdon's next remembrance was being back in Medicine Park. So he says approximately 2.5 hours had elapsed since the encounter with the humanoid had begun. He was in a hysterical state, cold and disoriented. For a time, he could not locate his truck, and finally found it 3 miles from where he had left it. It had been stuck in a mud hole, and Higdon was unable to free it from the bog by himself. Using his CB, he summoned help from the local sheriff, who arrived at midnight. Additional help arrived to free the stuck truck. Higdon was found in a state of panic and nervous exhaustion. He was shouting, "They took my elk." He was taken for medical care to a local hospital. His blood work showed he had a highly elevated level of vitamins, probably from the pill he'd taken. The most fascinating aspect of his test was that tuberculosis scars on his lungs were now gone. So basically the aliens healed him, which is cool, and that happens a lot too. Further investigation into the details surrounding this bizarre encounter revealed that Higdon's wife, along with 2 other people, had seen a red, green, white flashing light moving in the area of the sighting. The case was investigated by Dr. Leo Sprinkle, professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming. Also included were Rick Kenyon and Robert Natkees, MUFON field investigators, and Frank Bork, National Star investigator. So your next slide is going to be Travis Walton. Watch Fire in the Sky. Excellent movie. And it's changed. So the story's changed. He actually did a remake, I believe it was last year, might have been 2016, where he actually changed the story. So the original story, it happened in Snowflake, Arizona, November 5th, 1975. Travis Walton was with a bunch of loggers in a truck. They were going home for the night. He and his co-workers were heading home out of the National Forest when they saw a hovering light in the distance and decided to check it out. So when they approached it, Mr. Walton got out of the truck, was struck by a light, and wasn't seen again for days. When he was found dehydrated and malnourished, his story was amazing. No details on this one so popular. Watch Fire in the Sky. The story was updated in 2017 with the new Travis Walton bio, in which Travis is stating the aliens actually accidentally killed him with a tractor beam. They took him, brought him back to life, fixed him up basically, and returned him. So that's the new version of that story. Still excellent movie. I haven't gotten to see the bio yet. A good friend of mine was the director of the movie on Facebook. Next case, we don't really have I don't have notes for, but this is, when I was a kid, I actually watched this story on Unsolved Mysteries or That's Incredible, one of those things. But October 21st, 1978, many witnesses on the beach actually watched this happen. But Mr. Valentik was flying a Cessna, and witnesses watched him merge with like an orb, or it was lights in the sky, and his plane disappeared. Now, there was no wreckage, there was no oil slick on the water, there was nothing. Just the plane never, disappeared. It was never found again. So that's the Valentik case. So now we head on into the 80s. And there's different reports of the Hudson Valley, New York wave. And you're going to get to an interesting case here shortly. We're about wrapping it up here. But the Hudson Valley UFO wave, December 31st of 81, a wave of UFOs seen over Hudson Valley, a wave of reported UFO sightings, which actually ran until 1987, peaking in 83 and 84. So from 82 to 85 was a wave of huge black triangular UFO sightings, perhaps one of the best UFO cases on record. There's many books written about this case because you could actually go to Hudson Valley and guaranteed you were going to see lights in the sky. There are multiple unrelated witnesses to the tune of over 7,000 witnesses, many of whom were aerospace engineers, police, law enforcement, business executives, scientists, and other upstanding, well-educated people. So some videos were taken of the craft, and analysis of the footage concluded the lights seen belonged to one big object. One incident actually involved the UFO hovering over the Indian Point nuclear power plant, witnessed by many security guards, law enforcement, and technicians. Famous case. Now we're going to, I like this case actually, because, you know, the more high profile your witnesses are, the more valid the case is. I hate saying that, but it's just, a UN ambassador actually witnessed this case, which says a lot. Because, you know, they could lose their job coming out saying, yep, I saw somebody getting abducted. But this man worked for the UN. So, though many cited the elusive... Oh, hold on. So I'm gonna back up. We're not going to talk about the Manhattan abduction yet. November 11th, 1987 was the Gulf Breeze abduction. That one's famous. So I'm going to hit that one real quick. I don't have slides for it. Many cited the elusive flying craft and snapped photographs of the glowing lights. The majority of attention was on Edward Walters. Now, Edward Walters was a local building contractor. According to Walters, the sightings began on November 11th of 1987. He was working late at night. His attention was drawn to a light coming from his yard. As he went to the window to get a better vantage point, he saw a glowing object partially obscured by a 30-foot tall pine tree in his front yard. So reaching outside to get a clear view of the object, he was taken back by the sight before him. He was staring at an object with the shape of a top. It had a row of dark squares which were separated with portals between them. The craft seemed to hover just above the road, showing a glowing ring around the bottom. Ed ran into his house, grabbed his Polaroid. He snapped off several photos of the craft before deciding to get even closer. He headed into the road. As he paused in the street to take more photos of the strange object, it began to hover, almost directly over his head. Walters was then hit by a bright bluish beam which shot from the object. He was literally lifted from the ground by its force. And it was then he heard a voice say, "Don't worry, we will not harm you." Images began to enter his mind. Ed stated that the images were revealed to him as if they were turning the pages of a book. The next thing Walters remembered was waking up. The glowing UFO was nowhere to be seen. Only a few days later, on November 17th, Walters took his photographs and story to the local Gulf Breeze Sentinel newspaper. So Ed discussed the photographs with the paper's editor and began to relate to him the details of the sighting. At this time, for obvious reasons, Ed told the newspaper that he was given the photos and story by a Mr. X. Part of the initial account was as follows: "Bang, something hit me all over my body. I tried to lift my arms. I couldn't move them. I was trying to breathe, but my chest wouldn't expand. My feet lifted off the floor. A voice groaned in my head. 'We will not harm you.' I screamed. The voice said, 'Calm down.' I screamed, 'Put me down.' No control. Just a piercing smell. A little scent of ammonia mixed with a heavy cinnamon that scorched, then stuck to the back of my throat." This was a very, very long, drawn-out case. We could probably do a show on a lot of these major cases. I'm going to get to November 30th, 1989 now, though, the Manhattan abduction. The client's name was Linda Quartile Napolitano, an extremely compelling and controversial case of alien abduction, which was researched by the well-known and respected Bud Hopkins. Now, Napolitano, there we go, claimed that she was abducted by the so-called Greys, who floated her from a closed bedroom window into a hovering UFO. The craft was waiting for her above a Manhattan apartment building at about 3 a.m. November 30th of 1989. Linda's experience, though intriguing, was hampered at first by memory loss, and that's common. She could only recall bits and pieces of the abduction. She could remember vividly the actual kidnapping in the room where she was. The transportation process itself was totally lost to her. So, what's cool about this case, like I said, a lot of the witnesses that came forward would have been, ignored to an extent, but the claims would ultimately be a building block of the case itself. Agreeing perfectly with Linda's account of the abduction, the two men were bodyguards of a senior United Nations statesman who was visiting Manhattan. The diplomat would eventually be identified as Javier Perez de Sueller, who, according to his two bodyguards, were visibly shaken while viewing this surreal scene. The three men encountered an unbelievable sight, the plight of a woman being floated through the air, and not only that, but, as was usual, Bud Hopkins being the investigator of this, he kept all these details private until they reached a certain level of credibility. It's undoubtedly, again, one of the best documented based on the credibility of the witness, the primary witnesses. So now we're getting off to the 2000s. We got the December 22, 2005 abduction in Houston, Texas. A husband and wife in Houston, Texas claimed they were abducted by aliens several times, including an incident where a fetus was taken from the woman. According to a local 6 news report, Clayton Lee said he was a child in a Houston park the first time he was abducted, and these are all common. We'll get into the reason why fetuses are taken here shortly. He said he was lifted in the air at the time of the alleged abduction. He remembered just floating up higher and higher, and all that was around were stars and blackness. And then he blacked out. So Donnelly said she lost a baby during one of the encounters. She also drew a photo of the aliens who abducted her. So Local 6 News showed the video of a hypnotist trying to retrieve memories of the abduction. And she told them, "They're touching me, quit touching me." During the session, Susan Clancy, who is a Harvard psychiatrist, decided to do research on people's abduction claims similar to the Lee's family. She ran an advertisement searching for people who wanted to be included in her book, and she thought she would get very few calls. Well, she was inundated with calls for a month. She's not a believer in alien abduction, but, people have symptoms like psychological distress, anxiety, sexual problems, nightmares, and for better or for worse, today being abducted by aliens is a culturally available explanation for why you might have some of these symptoms. And sadly, that's the attitude you get. I'm here to tell you, they're wrong. We deal with abductees all the time. So moving along, we've got the Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. So what happened in this one? There's multiple UFO sightings in relation to missile silos going offline. And that's why, the government should be scared of, the national security aspect of it. But October 23rd, 2010, the FB Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, temporarily lost the ability to communicate with 50 of its Minutemen, 3 nuclear missiles, the 5 missile alert facility responsible for launching the ICBMs in time of war. So, you know, they saw UFOs over it, the UFOs disabled it, and multiple witness accounts as well. So, 2012, and this is going to be your last abduction story you're going to hear today, is the Murray spouse abduction in Michigan. This had a bad ending. This is why I take abductions highly serious. Also why I take hypnotherapy very negatively, because it can lead to suicide. But long-haul trucker Scott Murray was in Michigan. He received a panic call from his wife at home. His wife was in a terrible state, believing that she may have been drugged and raped. After immediately driving home, Murray took his wife to the emergency room where they found no signs of a rape. There was a strange burn found on her right shoulder, but nothing else. So Murray brought his wife home under the assumption that she'd had a bad dream. The next day, Murray went out in the garden. He discovered 4 bizarre burn marks in the grass in a circular formation. After looking above, he also noticed that the nearby trees had leaves 20 feet up that were burnt black in the ensuing week. Murray took his wife for hypnotic regression therapy, whereupon she recalled being taken into a spaceship in which they performed increasingly intrusive acts on her. She became increasingly paranoid and terrified, and one day, Murray came home to find that his wife had committed suicide. Desperate for answers, Murray sent samples of the burnt grass to a local college, who told him they were radiation burns. Folks, this is a UFO landing site. However, the college students suddenly changed their mind and claimed they weren't radiation burns, you know, kind of like they were told to say that. Again, why we're in this business. I don't like the word business. Why we're in this field. So your next slide is going to be signs and symptoms of abduction. But first is our special feature for the audio portion. Projects the government's been involved in. So you can Google all these projects. You'll find out a lot more information too. You got Project Sigma. Is the project which first established communications with the aliens and is still responsible for communications. Project Plateau is the project responsible for diplomatic relations with the aliens. This project secured a formal treaty, illegal under the U.S. Constitution, with the aliens. The terms were that the aliens would give us our government technology and would not interfere in our history. In return, we, as in our government, agreed to keep their presence on Earth a secret. Hence why you're not going to see disclosure, folks. Not to interfere in any way with their actions, and to allow them to abduct humans and animals. The aliens agreed to furnish MJ-12 with a list of abductees on a periodic basis for governmental control of their experiments with the abductees. So pay attention to some of these. You'll find a lot more information. Project Aquarius is the project which compiled the history of the alien presence and interaction on Earth and the Homo sapiens. Project Garnet is the project responsible for control of all information and documents regarding the alien subjects and accountability of their information and documents. Project Pluto is a project responsible for evaluating all UFO and IAC information pertaining to space technology. Pounce was formed to recover all downed and or crashed craft and aliens. This project provided cover stories and operations to mask the true endeavor, whenever necessary. Covers which have been used were crashed experimental aircraft, construction, mining, etc. This project has been successful and is ongoing today. So the NRO is a national recon organization based at Fort Carson, Colorado. It's responsible for security on all alien or alien spacecraft connected to the projects. Delta is the designation for the Pacific arm of the NRO. which especially trained and tasked with security of all magic projects. It's a security team and task force from NRO, specially trained to provide alien task projects and Luna security. Also has the code name Men in Black. This project is still ongoing. The Blue Team is the first project responsible for reaction and recovery of downed and or crashed alien craft and or aliens. This was a U.S. Air Force Material Command project. So Project Sign is the second project responsible for collection of intelligence and determining whether alien presence constituted a threat to the U.S. national security. Sign absorbed the Blue Team project. This was the U.S. Air Force and CIA project. Project Red Light was to test fly recovered alien craft. This project was postponed after every attempt resulted in the destruction of the craft and death of the pilots. The project was carried out at Area 51, Groom Lake, or Dreamland in Nevada. Project Red Light was resumed in 1972 and has been partially successful. UFO sightings of craft accompanied by black helicopters are Project Red Light assets. So if you see a UFO, it's got helicopters or probably even fighter jets accompanying it. It's probably part of the Red Light. This project is now ongoing at Area 51 in Nevada. Not sure how old these reports are, so it's probably also at Dugway Proving Grounds, Pine Gap in Australia, other places, because Area 51's been so overexposed that I'm sure they moved it. So you got Snowbird was established as a cover for Project Red Light. A flying saucer type craft was built using conventional technology. It was unveiled to the press and flown in public on several occasions. The purpose was to explain accidental sightings or disclosures of red light as having been the Snowbird crafts. This was a very successful disinformation act. The project is only activated when needed. This deception has not been used for many years. This project is currently in mothballs until it's needed again. So Blue Book, that's the one you hear about all the time. Blue Book was a U.S. Air Force UFO and alien intelligence collection and disinformation project. The project was terminated and its collected information and duties were absorbed by Project Aquarius. A classified report named Grudge/Blue Book, report number 13, is the only significant information derived from the project and is unavailable to the public. Alright, so next slide, we're going to talk about signs and symptoms of abduction. We're going to talk about the reasons for abduction, possibly, if we get to it, the races that are abducting and why, and how do we help them. The abductees, that is. Alright, so alien abduction, that's going to be pretty extensive. Don't want to miss nothing here. When you're dealing with alien abduction, now bear in mind I've been in the abduction side since 1994, working with abductees extensively. I have 3 UFO sightings of my own. I had alien encounters of my own with reptilians. Not pleasant. Myself, I've never been abducted. But I've worked with hundreds of abductees over the last 20 plus years. And until, last year, our team has actually been able to successfully stop 6 abductions now through astral, so which is great. So some of the signs. I'm going to go over the PowerPoint side, and I'm going to go over my note side because it's a little more extensive. So the first thing that oftentimes happens with abductees is they'll describe seeing a UFO. Kind of like in the Betty and Barney Hill case that we talked about. They'll see the UFO. Their next moment of memory is the UFO is leaving, and it's 2 hours later. That's where the missing time comes in. Now, most of the time, missing time is roughly 2 hours. Sometimes it can be 30 minutes. It all depends with the abduction. It depends with a race, I believe, too. There's about 16 races that are known to be abducting right now. And that's documented. I'm sure it's much higher than that. But 16 that are actually documented. Some for science, some for the hybrid program, which we'll get into. Some for social experiments. And some, frankly, because we taste like chicken, so they eat us. We're food. And if you look at statistics of the number of people that go missing that are never found, it kind of correlates. It's rare, so don't get scared. It is rare. There's only a couple races that actually eat humans. So we always look at psychiatric. We always look at medical possibilities with abduction as well. Which is why we have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a child psychologist on our team, as well as 2 scientists. They help with a lot of what we do. So the next one on your list on the slide here is unusual marks. So unusual marks can be bruising. So with bruising, we look at is the client anemic? Is the client a bleeder? Do they get bruises easily? Things of that nature. A humming noise. That'll be like in a house or an apartment. There's no explanation for it. Some actually get vibration, or they get a humming. Sometimes it's only heard in their own head. Sometimes there's multiple witnesses to this, like a whole neighborhood can hear the humming. Feeling of being watched. Again, you look at psychiatric, you look at other issues. I look for a pattern in all these signs, just not one or two. Sleepwalking, again, that can be a medical issue. Waking with the wrong clothes on, muddy feet, mud leaves in the bed. Now, there have been cases of this. There was actually a case where a whole car was abducted. When the aliens returned the car, they put it on the wrong side of the freeway. They realized their mistake, re-abducted the car, put it back on the right side of the freeway. There's another case where a college student was abducted. He fought back, which is rare. You usually don't have control, but he was able to fight back, and they basically kicked him out. And he found himself outside his dorm, butt-ass naked. How do you explain that other than a frat party, But he was abducted, and they just kind of kicked him out. And a lot of cases, you'll wake up either with no underwear on backwards, or different underwear on, or they'll pull back the sheets and their feet are muddy, or there's leaves on the bed, things like that. Implants. So implants, each race has their own implants. Some implants are for tracking. Some implants are for information downloads. Oftentimes these are implants that are put in the brain, and the client has holograms. Other implants for tracking. They can be disabled. We disable them through energy work on the astral side. It disables the implant. The aliens show up to see why the implant disabled, and then we go to combat. Most of the time, there's not much fight. They kind of cut their losses and they leave. Again, depending on which race it is. Now, I've seen the balls of light dancing on the ceiling. The next one, number 8. Look around, make sure there's no reflection, no mirrors, things of that nature. But they're little tiny specks of light that are dancing around the ceiling. Another indication there's aliens present. Aliens are known to come through walls, come through doors. Another thing you have to look at is sleep paralysis, because oftentimes the client won't be able to move. It could be sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis also has symptoms of seeing an entity. So there's a lot of different things you have to look at. So the terminated pregnancy, I've seen this one. So in the alien hybrid, or the greatest hybrid program, the first sign that it was going on was a triangular shaped pattern of puncture marks in the lower abdomen. The client will get pregnant. The fetus is missing approximately 2 weeks to a month later. Doctors will be puzzled because there should be a fetus there, but it's not. It's gone. And there's no sign of, internal absorption of an abortion, anything like that. The fetus is just gone. Now, this is followed by the abductee being retaken. They'll remember dreams of being on a spaceship and being encouraged to interact with a toddler or a baby that is actually a hybrid. Now, we have cases today where there's actually children that were born natural birth and are still hybrids because the fetus was implanted and allowed to be born naturally of the mother here. This is the Gray's hybrid program. An excellent book to pick up is Dr. David Jacobs' Secret Life of Alien Abduction. First book I ever picked up. Again, you'll see aliens floating through walls. So number 10, real quick, electronic disturbances. And this is, it can be a computers, it can be your cell phone, it can be your watch. But a common one is for the abductee to be walking past street lights at night and they go off as they walk by them. I kind of attribute this to a possible, because of the implant that's in it, making that. So nosebleed is another one. You'll wake up, there'll be blood on your pillow from where you had a nosebleed. Things we look at with that is the air dry where you're sleeping. Do you have high blood pressure? Things of that nature. If not, then we look for the other patterns. Reason for the nosebleeds is because, back in the 90s, and some of them probably still do it today, is they were putting the implants in the nasal cavity. There's also been cases where they were putting implants in teeth. So someone that's never been to the dentist before, all of a sudden they'll go to the dentist for the first time, and the dentist is going, "What do you mean you've never been to the dentist? You've got a filling right here." And they don't have a filling, it's actually an implant. So the thing with the implants, there was a Dr. Lear, and he died, I think, last year, maybe the year before, and he was a surgeon, and he actually did surgical implant removal. And what they found was usually the body will reject a foreign body. But with the implant, it accepts it. And it actually becomes one with the body where, tissues and cells will actually intertwine with the implant. And I've seen videos where, the implant actually moves on its own. When they go to remove it with tweezers, it's moving away from the tweezers. Also getting back to the hybrid program, there's men also get taken, and semen samples are taken in some cases. Some cases, men and women, human men and women, are forced to have intercourse on spaceships in front of the aliens, or sometimes sex with the aliens. Rare, you don't hear about it too much because, well, frankly, it's rape and people don't want to talk about it. There's a lot of PTSD that comes from abductions. These are things that we have to watch out for, or pay attention to with abductees. Other signs of implant they're common in the arms, the legs, the wrist, near joints, other places. Again, it depends on the race, depends on the kind of implant it is. So fear of big eyes is another big one. A lot of times with children, adult abductees today remember being as a child being scared of deer, rabbits, owls, any animal with big eyes, because the aliens do what's called a screen memory, and they can disguise themselves as anything they want, but they go with what the kid's not going to be scared of. And they can disguise themselves, but they can't hide their eyes. Their eyes are big. So it leads to the fear of anything with big eyes, which is usually, in the animal's case, owls, deer, rabbits, things of that nature. So next slide is reasons for abduction. One, like I said, is science. Humans do it to animals. We put implants on animals. We do science on animals. Aliens are doing the same thing. Number two is social science. These are the alien. These are the races that are abducting, not doing anything to the abductee, but they're showing cataclysmic events of the Earth being destroyed, and they're doing what's called a. Oh God, I'm trying to think of the name. It's where they look eye to eye. They stare straight into the abductee's eyes and watch the emotion. These are the emotional scientists, basically. So we went into the hybrid program. We talked about that. We talked about the food, missing people. Are all aliens bad? No, they're not. There's the Pleiadians. There's one race. There's 16 different races of gray. The Slipsy Ray is the only good gray. The other grays, they're bad in that they're abducting humans. And the Slipsy Ray are the good race of grays. And I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which planet they're from or where they're from. But there are, we'll talk about the consortium. The consortium is a panel or a committee of over 100 different races that supervises or watches the human race. And they won't intervene. They can't intervene. They're not allowed to intervene by an agreement or an arrangement of the alien races, unless the human race is going to kill itself, eradicate itself, nuclear war, that kind of thing. Then they will intervene. Number 6, contactee versus abductee. I've been attacked by people that, how dare you say there's bad races, or how dare you say there's good races? There's good and bad in everything. There's good races. There's bad races. Now the contactees, they're the ones that they think all aliens are good. They're the space brothers, or there's nothing but love and light and whatnot. Well, those are the contactees. Abductees, they're the ones that are traumatized, terrified, they're being taken against their will, experimented on, raped in some cases, and whatnot. Those are the ones we work with. Now, what we need is peer support counseling for these abductees, so we can stop them. We can stop the abductions, but we need follow-up care for the abductee with a psychologist-led peer support group kind of thing. That's what we're working on. It's going to be time consuming on that one. So how do we help abductees? Well, one, identify if it's true abduction. If it's not, then identify whether it's a medical issue or a psychiatric issue and get them help in either case. Removal of the implant. We haven't been able to surgically remove an implant. We have been able to disable it through astral. 3, astral combat. Like I said, we have an astral team in Forest Moon that stops abductions, as well as passes over spirits, deals with demons, malevolent entities. The whole gamut of the paranormal is what we deal with. But so we fight the aliens as they come. The Greys tend to back off, cut their losses. They don't want. They're not fighters. The reptilians, however, are. So are the Magids. There's over 100 different races visiting this planet. And I've been asked before, well, how do you know? Well, 24 years of research, 24 years of talking to abductees, intense discussion with abductees, encounters with aliens, my own UFO sightings, and we have our Keith Andrews, who is our alien race specialist. on Forest Moon, and he interacts with about 50 different races all the time. So you can call us woo-woo group all you want, but watch the skies, folks, and pay attention. If you could believe in a spirit or a demon, why can't there be aliens? You know, all these people that there's no such thing as aliens. You're pretty arrogant to think that out of a million different galaxies and planets out there that haven't been found, that we're the only intelligent life. I'm here to tell you, we're not even close, and we're probably the stupidest race out of all of them. So I'm coming to the end here, and I'm not going to go into the races. I'm just not. That would be a whole different show, and we could do a whole presentation just on races alone. So what I am going to do is hypnotherapy. So the peer support group I already talked about. We need to find, there's a meetup group in Seattle. Contacted them a while back, and they were confused because what do you mean you have bad aliens? And come to find out they were a contactee group. So they sit there and they have a peer support group for contactees. And their whole thing is talking about their wonderful experience. Well, that's not what we need. And so, I didn't contact them anymore because that's not what we need. We need an abductee group. That's a good way to start a fight. Have an abductee in a room with contactees. But they get confused. Now, I kind of have a theory. If you're familiar with Stockholm Syndrome, that's not all of them, obviously, but I think some of them have Stockholm Syndrome, and that's where in terrorist cases or criminal cases where someone's kidnapped and they're with their abductor for a time, and they start sympathizing with their cause, and they kind of take the side of the criminal or the terrorist group. And if that's not happening with abductees or contactees, that they haven't been abducted so many times that all of a sudden they have a sympathy with them, and they become contactees because it's a wonderful experience. So the follow-up care with that is to find because we have a psychiatrist on our team, we have a psychologist on our team, and we have a child psychologist on our team. Children are the most important. Paracon is going to be great this year, 2018, September 22nd, because we've got our Keith Andrews, who's actually going to be talking about children and abduction. And then he's going to talk about the consortium. And that's the panel of, or the committee of aliens. So I look forward to hearing what he's got to say. And then we've got Christina George, who's actually going to take it to another level and talk about the black-eyed children versus hybrid children and how they're related. So it's going to be very parallel lectures, which is going to be great on that side of things. So hypnotherapy, good or bad? I don't believe in hypnotherapy. I believe in conscious recall. Hypnotherapy, if you do it wrong, ask leading questions, don't really know what you're doing, you can take, and there's been studies done on this, you can actually take a group of people who have never had any kind of UFO experience, no kind of abduction experience, send them into the wrong hypnotherapist, and all of a sudden they come out terrified because they've been abducted. They're convinced, completely psychiatrically, that they are alien abductees, even though nothing has ever happened to them. And on the other end of it, if you take an abductee and you open that door, that can lead to suicide if you're not careful with it. So I don't I'm not a hypnotherapy advocate. Not by a long shot. If you want a good movie about it, watch Fourth Kind with Mila Jovovich as the narrator. Good movie based on events in Nome, Alaska, about an abductee therapist. We're wrapping up though. This comes to the conclusion of this training. In February, we'll be doing occult symbolism. If you have any questions, I'm always available. I can be reached directly by my phone, 360-840-7674. If you're an abductee or you know somebody that's being abducted, by all means get a hold of us. Or someone that's seeing a UFO often, get a hold of us. We're always around. Any questions? You can either call, you can find me straight on Facebook, and if you're hearing this presentation for the first time and you don't know about Forest Moon Paranormal, you can find Forest Moon Paranormal at www.forestmoonparanormal.spruz.com, spruz.com, or go look on Facebook, Forest Moon Paranormal, and join the group. But that concludes this presentation. Hope you learned something. Hope you had fun. Keep your eyes to the sky. And that is the wrong song. I'm sorry, folks. That is it too. I hate technology sometimes. So, there we go.
At Planned Parenthood, we believe everybody deserves personalized, compassionate, and expert care. From annual wellness exams to birth control options and STD testing, Visit PlannedParenthood.org to schedule an appointment online. Planned Parenthood. Care no matter what.